Hello, this is DanPro, and this tutorial is going to be about Rigify. I hope to do a long series of tutorials and go start to finish and talk about everything related to Rigify and how I use it for basically any project for my personal projects. I use Rigify for everything. It doesn't matter if it's car, train, planes, automobiles, creatures, humanoids. I use Rigify for everything, and I think a lot of people think mistakenly that Rigify is only for biped type creatures, and I'm going to show you how to put that workflow to work in a lot of other areas. I actually even use Rigify to create sets, armatures for my sets and my scene sets. So let's get in here and talk about how to get everything working. So in order to use Rigify, we need to go to File, then we'll go to User Preferences, click this here. We need to be in our add-ons panel here. You can click these different headers up here, different tabs. We're going to do add-ons. I'm just going to type rig in our search menu here, and you can see that we've got Rigify will pop up. If we take a look at this, its author is Nathan Vegdahl. He was the creator of Rigify. It's actually been around for a few years here, but there's actually quite a few misconceptions about Rigify that I just want to take care of. Hopefully I'll do that in this series. So in order to use Rigify, all we need to do is just check this on in our add-ons, and we can save our user settings. Alright, one other thing to make Rigify work is we need to go to our file, and we need to have auto run Python scripts on. One of the things you can do here when you're checking this auto run Python scripts, and you can actually exclude paths. So if you were to download different blend files from certain places, you can actually kind of quarantine them here for until you check them out and make sure that they don't have any bad Python code there that's going to hurt your machine. This is actually a security feature. This auto run Python scripts is actually off by default because it is a security feature. If you download blends from questionable sources, I would recommend setting up a path here to download those sources too, so you can check it out and you're not running those Python scripts. But Rigify is going to need to run Python scripts, and basically any rigging, whether you're using Rigify or not. If you use Python scripting in your drivers, you need to have a way to run those Python scripts. So this is something that you need to have on whether you're using Rigify or not. But alright, so that should be enough. We've got our file, we've got our add-ons, we've got Rigify selected, and that's basically all we need to do to start using Rigify. One of the things you'll find out, if I just do Shift A to get our add menu here and go to armature, one of the first things you'll see is now we have these two human meta rig and Pitchypoi human meta rig, and people think that this is the be all and end all of Rigify, and it's actually not. So in order to kind of show that, I'm going to add an armature single bone rather than one of these human meta rigs here. I'm going to show you how I use Rigify. So in this, I'm just going to make a quick demonstration here. Let me actually name this to a meta rig. So I am actually going to make my own meta rig with this object, this armature object. And what I'm going to do is a really simple thing. Basically, I'm going to make three toys. Let's say I'm making a scene with a child is playing on the floor with a block, a ball, and a cylinder. So I'm going to make a rig for that so he can pick those items up and manipulate them. And I'm going to use Rigify to do that. Alright, so let's go first, do Shift A. Let's add our meshes here. Let's add a cube. Do GZ, drag this up so our mesh is on the grid floor here, and then GX. Just drag this over. Yeah, about right there. That's good. And once again, Shift A. Let's add and a UV sphere. GZ. Put this ball right on our grid floor here. And Shift A one more time. Let's add a cylinder. So GZ. Put it on the grid floor. And GX. Let's slide it over here. I'm just kind of using this grid here to place my objects. Alright, so let's make our armature manipulate these objects. So we can't see our meta rig in here, but I do have it selected. You can tell that I've got it selected down here. I'm going to go to the armature panel here, actually turn on X-ray just so I can see the bones in there. And when I'm working on any armature, I like to have axis display on as well. So let's tab into edit mode, and you can tell what mode I am in for my armature object. If it's orange like this, I am in edit mode, and if it's blue, I am in pose mode. So you can actually select these from this menu here. Edit mode and pose mode are the two main modes I'll be using when I'm working with our armature. Object mode is useful for adding it, and other than that, we really don't ever use that mode very much. So anyways, I'm going to go into edit mode, select this first bone. Let's just call this one sphere. Then do Shift D, duplicate it, GX, let's add a bone over here, try to get it centered on that cube. I'm going to go to front orthographic view, let's name that bone cube, and once again Shift D to create a new bone, GX. I'm going to add a bone for the cylinder here, name it. Alright, so now we've created a meta rig. So a couple of things we need to do to set this up. To have Rigify auto-generate a rig for us is we're going to go to pose mode, and with this first bone selected, we're going to go to bone properties over here, and we can come down here and we can set our rig type. And basically what Rigify does is it takes a bone's edit mode position here, and then you can apply a rig type to it, a bone or even a chain of bones. You can see we've got basic copy chain, so if we had a chain of bones we could use that, and it'll generate a rig type based on this. I'm going to use the Pitchy super copy. So right down here, I'm going to click on that. If we look at our options that are for that, it's basically what this is going to do is take this edit mode position of this bone, and it's going to create a control, a widget, and a deform bone for us. So it's basically going to take this single bone and create several bones for us, and parent everything together in a with a root bone and things like that. Let's just repeat that for these other three bones. We'll just keep everything simple here. Pitchy super copy. Make sure all these options are checked. And once again for the cylinder bone, Pitchy super copy, control, widget, and deform. Okay, so now that we've got our meta rig set up with our rig type, so it's going to make a rig type for each one of these bones. Let's go to object mode, and selecting our armature, we're going to go back to our armature panel here, this little man icon, and a few other things we can do to help Rigify help us. Let's go to Rigify layer names, once again in that armature panel here, and I'm going to click add Rigify layers. So basically what I'm going to do right here is make some control layers for us. So this first one is going to be called cube. I'm going to actually turn this layer on so that layer is on by default. This one will be sphere, and this layer will be cylinder. Now let's go back into edit mode here temporarily and select that cube. I'm going to type M on my keyboard, and I'm going to make sure that this bone is in the number one layer here, and it is already. I'm going to select this next one, type M, and I'm going to put it in layer 2 so it lines up with our layer 2 sphere. And then once again for our cylinder, M, let's put that on layer 3. Alright, and basically if you have these toggled on, it's basically going to have them on by default once it generates a rig for us. So we create these rig layer names, got that set up. We can just collapse that for now. And next we can go back to either pose mode or object mode of our armature, and under our armature man icon here we've got a generate button. So now we'll generate a rig based on this meta rig's bone positions and naming. So we generated the rig, just click, it was really quick. You can see the rig down here. I'm going to type M, and I'm going to move this directly on the layer below. I like to always have my rig below my mesh items, and this meta rig is actually, we can actually move this to another layer. You can see that there's items that were put on this last layer. Let's take a look at that really quick. You can see these are actually mesh items. If I tab into edit mode, you can see that there's vertices in here. WGT cylinder, these are the mesh objects that are creating our custom bone shapes for the generated rig. So Rigify already made all these for us, and they put it on this last layer. I actually want to put our meta rig on that last layer with it, because I never, part of my workflow is I never delete my meta rig from my main rigging file. So I want to keep that in case I need to generate a new rig. Alright, so now we've got 3 objects here. One of the things I always do is always put my object origins at the center of the world. So I'm going to select all of those, the cube, sphere, and cylinder. Control A, apply location, rotation, and scale. So now that my mesh items have a default location, Alt G, R, and S. This is the default location for that mesh, and it's always going to line up with my armature object. My armature object's origin, which is the center of the world right here. And I'll explain this a little bit later and multiple times as we go through. That's mainly part of my workflow, not necessarily part of the Rigify workflow here. So, alright, now we've got this generated rig. If we go over in our end panel here, you can see we've got a new thing called rig layers, which wasn't there before. And I'm actually going to take this and just drag it up. I like to have my rig layers at the top of my scene. I'm going to do Control Tab to go into pose mode, and you can see that the bones in my rig are now turning blue. I'm in pose mode. And one other thing that was added here, you can see rig main properties. Now this is a really simple rig, so there's nothing's actually going to show up in here. I'll show you later. Things like IK and FK switching and toggles and things like that will show up in here when we do a more complex rig later on, but just be aware that that's there as well. Alright, so basically Rigify made a rig, and you can see if I have this one selected, it's called cube. That is the control bone for it. It is actually using this WGT cube custom shape. So it looks like this. Alright, another thing it did, Rigify generated that rig. If we go to this third to last layer, Rigify always puts, all the deformation bones are on this third to last layer. So if we select that, this first bone is called DEF cube, that's for deformation. And we've got a DEF sphere and a DEF cylinder. Alright. Now, another thing is we can actually toggle on our controls. These are just called cube, sphere, and cylinder. And this arrowed one here is the root bone that was created for us. If we actually toggle that on, you can see it, the layer it's on in our armature. If we toggle these on and off, we can actually turn on and off our control shapes, or our control bones. Alright, what's actually parent, if we move one of these here, you can see that that deformation bone is moving with it. Let's actually click off shapes here. And you can't really tell because these bones are sitting right on top of each other, but if I just double select here, you can see it goes from cylinder to def cylinder. That's the control shape's actual bone. That's the way they actually look in edit mode and pose mode if we turn off the shapes there. So where did everything unhidden here? Oops, I was in edit mode. Anyways, turn on shapes. Okay, what's actually parent our meshes to our deformation bones? So I can't see anything through here, so I'm going to turn on X-ray. Alright, I want to select my cylinder, and then shift select my def cylinder bone, and I just want to pre-select this here just so it's all these other bones aren't lit up. So select the mesh, shift select def cylinder in pose mode, control P. Let's set parent to the bone directly, and now if I move this control, it's going to move my cylinder, and I can manipulate this and put it anywhere in my scene I want. Now you'll also notice something else that happened is this deformation bone, all the transforms are locked on there, so we can't grab that deformation bone. Actually, this is a good thing. We don't want our animators directly manipulating our deformation bones. That's what our control bones are for. So basically our deformation bone is parented to, let me go to bone properties here. It's actually parented to org cylinder. And one more thing that it made here, this very last layer here, you can see these other bones. These are basically copies of that meta rig here. ORG is for original cylinder bone, original sphere, and the original cube. So anyways, I don't want to get too far into that, but it's definitely going to come into play later. I'll explain that a little bit more in depth. I'm going to just turn that layer off for now. Anyways, this deformation bone, we can't directly manipulate it, is my point. So even though we're parenting this mesh to that deformation bone, it's the control bone that's actually moving that deformation bone. So we'll just repeat the process. Select the sphere, shift select the def sphere bone, control P, set parent to bone, and once again the cube to def cube bone, control P, bone. Alright, so pretty simple. Rigify gave us these rig layers where I can turn on and off my different controls, make animation life a little bit easier, and it also made these custom shapes here. One thing we can do with these custom shapes, even though it just made a circle, this probably isn't what we want, so I'm going to select this WGT cube. I'm going to go over and turn on my other layers here. And tab in edit mode. If I scale this up, you can see I can actually change the shape of that widget, and it'll change the shape of my bone shape. So in this case, I don't really think that circle is very nice. Let's actually make this look like a cube. I'm going to do Shift S, cursor to selected, so it's right at the center of all those vertices. Then I'm just going to delete all those vertices. Shift A, let's add a cube, and then do X, let's delete all of our faces. Oops. X delete only faces. So we just got a mesh item here. We actually A to select all the vertices. Let's scale this up, and GZ kind of surround this cube with a box, so it makes a little bit more sense for a control shape. Alright, now we're done. Tab back out of edit mode. Now if I look at my control bone, it's shaped like a cube. So very handy to have. Even though I had to remake the shape, it was nice to have that already in my scene, where I can just go in on this last layer and select the actual mesh object that's creating that custom shape and change it any way I want. Let's see here, let's go to this one and turn back on our layers. Tab back into edit mode. Let's scale this, and then GZ there. So that's a better control shape and position for that. Let's turn off our last layer there so we don't see that widget shape. Alright, one other thing that happens, not only did Rigify make our control shapes, it all and parented all these things properly together. You see, I can take that brick bone and rotate it and grab it, scale it, anything I want, everything goes with it. Rigify made a rig UI PY script for us. So let's go to text editor here, and we can look for that rig UI PY script. And that's basically, this script is what's making these buttons and the rig main properties. It's what's making all this work. Now there's a lot of stuff in here because it's a very simple rig that's actually not being used. Let me drag this up just so you can get a better view at here. So things like the IK FK snapping functions. My rig didn't have an IK FK, or didn't have an arm or a leg that uses IK and FK, so therefore I'm not using that part of the script, but it's still in here in case we added stuff later. Let me just go down here to something that we can actually manipulate. Alright, this part of the code right here is actually what's creating these rig layers. So let's just add a typo here and change cube to tube, and then we'll run our script, and you can see that it changed it up here. Basically all this is doing is when we turn this on, it's just turning on this layer which has that bone, that control bone on it. And like I said, there's a lot of useful stuff in here. I'm not going to go through a bunch of that right now, but I am going to talk about a lot of other things later on, and how we can use this rig UI PY script to do a lot of pretty cool things. Now I'm not a Python scripter, but I can hack in here enough to make this useful. Now one of the things I like to do, because when Rigify generates a rig, it's always going to make a rig UI PY script, and it'll always be called that. So I want to differentiate one from the next. So I'm just going to call this toy underscore rig UI PY. So that one, if I ever was to take this toy rig to another file, I would be able to know that this part of the script, this toy rig UIPY, is for this rig, and then I could have other character rigs that are using Rigify as well, and they would have their own named UIPY script. So we'll just leave that like that. Alright, so this is basically what I would use Rigify for. Now, this, like I said, this isn't a very complex rig, and I probably would go in here, at least for this sphere here, and probably make a squash and stretch and add some more bones and some functionality so I can actually use this bone, or this ball, in a more realistic way, I guess, if I wanted to squash and stretch it. So, but I will show how to add bones after we've generated a rig, and I'm going to also talk about later how to add bones to like our meta rigs. If we were to add, let's say, like a ponytail, something for a ponytail to for a hair or something like that. I'll show you how to do that as well. But this is why I use Rigify for almost everything. It creates a dedicated set of deformation bones for us. We've got these handy rig layer buttons. Everything looks professional, and of course it's rig main properties. There's going to be some stuff that it's going to be important later that will have a lot of extra functionality we'll add to this area, like IK, FK snapping, and when we select different bones, we'll have different custom properties and things show up in this rig main properties panel there. But I hope that this little primer here shows you kind of the power of Rigify, and of course I'm going to get a lot more in depth than this simple rig here, but that is the basis of Rigify. Now let's go to just a clean layer here. Shift S, cursor to center. Let's do Shift A, and let's actually talk about these human meta rigs here. So I'm going to actually add one human meta rig. Basically what the human meta rig is just a convenience item for us. So if I go to pose mode here, I'm going to select this leg, and let's look at the bone properties here. Come down, and you can see that the rig type is biped leg, and then we've got a lot of different options here. It's basically telling us where the controls are and which layer and things like that, setting all that stuff up, which axis the knee is going to rotate around, and I'm not going to go through all of these things for every different rig type, but basically I just want to show what the meta rig, what the human meta rig is, and that's basically just a set of bones that are named correctly. So we got thigh.L, shin.L, foot.L, and then of course on the other side foot.R, and everything is already set up with the rig type. So based on these edit mode positions of the bone, Rigify is going to use this rig type, and it's going to generate an IK and FK switchable rig for this left leg, and I'll do the same thing for the right leg here. Let's see, if I select this spine here, you can see that this rig type is for spine. This is just a basic copy to make it control and deform for our shoulder. Biped arm. You can see it's the rootmost bone, so it's going to use these three bones to make this biped arm. It's going to use upper arm.L and the forearm.L, and also this hand.L, and it's going to generate a rig for us, which it's actually quite a few bones that make an IK and FK switchable arm rig work based on these positions, based on the edit mode positions of this meta rig. So anyways, I hope that clears some things up. Maybe I didn't explain it the best, but we've made our own meta rig here, and in our next part we are going to actually go through a full workflow with creating a Rigify rig for a human character. So I'll look forward to that. Until then, good luck.